The grand hall of the Illyrian Empire gleamed like 1,000 frozen stars. Walls of silver glass rose high into the clouds, and the air shimmered with soft blue light. On the crystal throne sat Queen Seraphine, ruler of the Illyrian, an ancient race known for their beauty, wisdom, and long lives. Her people believed themselves perfect. No other race could match their grace or power. But that day a stranger stood before her throne. A man unlike any she had ever seen. He was short compared to her soldiers, his skin rough, his armor scarred and burnt from battle. His hair was dark, his jawline sharp, his eyes deep and alive, too alive. He was not one of them. He was human. The queen's voice echoed across the hall. "Who dares enter my court without kneeling?" The man did not kneel. He stood tall, shoulders straight, meeting her gaze without fear. The guard shifted uneasily, ready to strike him down, but he did not tremble. "My name is Captain Aaron Blake of the Terran Expedition Fleet," he said, his voice steady. "We came to your system in peace, but your ships opened fire. My crew, most of them are gone. I came to ask why." A cold silence followed. The queen's expression did not change, but the faintest spark of surprise lit her eyes. It had been centuries since anyone, let alone a mortal, had spoken to her like that. Around the hall, whispers rose. "He's human, a creature of dust. How dare he stand before the queen?" From the shadows behind the throne, Princess Ilara watched. Her golden eyes followed the human closely. He was nothing like the Illyrian men she knew. Perfect in face, flawless in posture, yet hollow inside. This man was rough, scarred, alive. He looked at the world not as a prince or warrior, but as someone who had fought for everything he had. The queen leaned forward slightly, her voice colder. "You entered our space uninvited, human. You say you came in peace, yet your presence brings war." Aaron's jaw tightened. "Peace only works when both sides want it. My people don't seek war. But we don't run from it either." The guards moved again, weapons humming with energy. The queen raised a hand, stopping them. She studied him like one would study a strange artifact, fragile yet fascinating. "You speak boldly for a dying race," she said. Aaron gave a faint smile, the kind born from pain. "Maybe. But we humans have a habit of surviving what others think will kill us." Something in his tone, tired but proud, made even the queen's heart stir. She had seen 1,000 years of empires rise and fall, but never had she met someone who looked death in the eye and spoke of hope. Princess Ilara stepped forward quietly, her soft gown whispering against the floor. The queen's gaze flickered toward her daughter, surprised. Ilara rarely interrupted royal matters, but curiosity glowed in her face. "Mother," she said softly, "if his people are so fragile, how did he survive a battle alone?" The queen turned her eyes back to the human, then slowly said, "Perhaps we shall find out." The queen ordered the guards to seize him, but not to harm him. Aaron did not resist. He simply looked around the magnificent hall once more, as if memorizing the sight of it. Before he was taken away, his eyes met Ilara's for a brief moment. In that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a spark of wonder, a question neither could name. As the doors closed behind him, the princess's heart felt strangely heavy. The queen sat back on her throne, her face unreadable. But her thoughts lingered on that single moment. That human's courage, his defiance, his fire, it was different from anything she had known. Outside, the stars of the Illyrian Empire burned cold and distant. Yet somewhere among them, a single fragile spark of humanity had entered their perfect world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The prison of the Illyrian palace was carved deep into crystal stone. Cold light shimmered across its walls, and silence filled every corner. For the Illyrian, it was a place where hope went to die. But the human, Captain Aaron Blake, sat inside his cell as if he were resting after a long day. His eyes were calm, watching the faint reflection of stars through the narrow slit above. He was bruised, tired, and yet unbroken. Every day the guards came to mock him. They called him dustborn, soft-boned, and short-lived. They laughed at his weakness, his short human life. But Aaron never answered with anger. He simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that made them uncomfortable. One day, Princess Alara came to see him. Curiosity had won over her royal duty. She had never met a human before, never seen someone so stubborn, so alive. She entered the cell quietly, her gown glowing faintly in the dim light. "You are strange," she said softly. "You do not fear us. Most of your kind would beg for mercy." Aaron looked up at her. "Fear doesn't help anyone, Princess. Fear never saved a man's life." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Then what does?" "Courage," he said, "and a reason to fight for it." His words lingered in her mind long after she left. He spoke with a kind of truth the Illyrian had forgotten. They had no wars, no hunger, no loss. They had perfection, but they had no struggle. And without struggle, they had forgotten the meaning of strength. Days passed. The queen ordered his trial for trespassing upon divine territory, but before it could begin, chaos struck. The ground shook. The walls trembled. From the deepest vaults of the palace came a monstrous roar, a sound that froze even the bravest guards. The alarm crystals lit up crimson. An elder beast had escaped from the royal lab. A creature of scales and fury, bred centuries ago for war, now free and mad with rage. The Illyrian soldiers rushed forward with energy spears, but the creature tore through them like paper. The halls filled with screams. Its tail shattered pillars and its claws ripped through steel. Ilara was in the corridor when it broke through the gates. She froze for a heartbeat, then ran to help her people, but the beast was too fast. One swipe and her guard was gone. Another blow sent her crashing to the ground. Just as the monster reared to strike her down, a voice thundered through the chaos. "Hey!" The creature turned. A human stood in its path, armed only with a broken metal rod. Aaron. He had broken free from his cell when the quake hit, and now he faced a creature 10 times his size. He shouted, waved his arms, and charged forward. The beast roared and swung. He dodged barely, rolling across the floor, then jammed the rod into its eye. Pain and fury filled the hall. The monster screamed, thrashing wildly. Aaron was thrown against a wall but got up again, coughing blood. He grabbed a fallen guard's spear and ran at it once more. His body moved with pure instinct, every muscle screaming, but his eyes burned with something stronger than pain: courage. When the beast finally fell, silent and still, the palace was in ruins. The queen arrived with her guards, her expression unreadable. She saw her daughter trembling and the human standing over the fallen creature. His arm bleeding, his breath ragged, but alive. He turned toward them, leaning on the spear, and said quietly, no one else was coming. For a long moment no one spoke. The proud Illyrian, who thought themselves perfect, now looked upon a mortal who had done what none of them dared. The queen's voice, when it came, was softer than before. "Why fight for us? We are not your people." Aaron looked at her with tired eyes. "Because life is life. Doesn't matter whose it is." That night the palace whispered of the human who fought a monster with his bare hands. Some called him mad. Others called him brave. But Princess Ilara, she could not stop thinking about him. For the first time in her long life, she felt her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from admiration. And somewhere deep inside her, something new began to grow, something the Illyrian had forgotten long ago, the beginning of love. After the beast was slain, the palace slowly returned to silence. But something inside the queen's halls had changed. The story of the human who fought a monster spread across the empire. Some called him a fool. Others whispered that he was brave beyond reason. Captain Aaron Blake was no longer treated as just a prisoner. The queen ordered his chains removed, though he was still guarded. Yet she found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to admit. How could a mortal, so small, so short-lived, possess such courage? And Princess Ilara, she could not stay away. She found herself walking toward his chamber almost every day. At first she came with excuses, checking his recovery, bringing reports for her mother, but soon she stopped pretending she just wanted to see him. One afternoon, she found him sitting by the window watching the golden sky. His arm was still bandaged, his face bruised, but his eyes were calm. "You should rest," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Rest feels strange when you've been fighting for so long." She sat beside him, the light catching her silver hair. "Why do you fight so much? Even for those who treat you as an enemy?" Aaron looked at her, then out the window again. "Because someone has to. If you stop fighting for what's right, you stop being human." His words hit her heart like a spark. The Illyrian had forgotten what it meant to fight for something, to struggle, to bleed for others. They had everything: peace, perfection, eternity, but none of it felt alive. She studied him carefully, his rough hands, his scarred skin, his tired eyes. There was nothing perfect about him, and yet he seemed more real than anyone she had ever known. "Tell me about your world," she whispered. Aaron's face softened. "Earth, it's not perfect. We have storms, wars, hunger, but we also have music, laughter, and people who never stop hoping. We make mistakes, but we keep trying." Ilara smiled sadly. "Your world sounds fragile." "It is," he said quietly, "but that's what makes it beautiful." For hours they talked, about oceans, trees, rain, and the strange taste of chocolate. Ilara listened with wide eyes, imagining a world so full of color and imperfection. For the first time in centuries, she felt curious about life beyond the stars. Days turned to weeks. The queen noticed the growing closeness between her daughter and the human. It troubled her deeply. She called Ilara to her chamber one night. "My daughter," the queen said, "you are the light of this empire. You cannot waste your affection on a mortal. He will die in a blink of your lifetime." Ilara bowed her head but did not answer. The queen sighed. "You may admire him, but remember what he is, temporary." Later that night, Ilara stood alone in the palace garden. The moon reflected in the crystal pools, and her thoughts swirled like the water. She knew her mother was right. Humans lived short lives. They burned bright and vanished. But she also knew that in his short life, Aaron had already done more than many immortals ever would. When she saw him the next day, she told him what her mother had said. He didn't get angry. He simply smiled. "She's right, you know. I'll grow old and one day I'll be gone. But that's what gives meaning to the time I have." Ilara's heart tightened. "And when you are gone, what will I do?" Aaron looked at her with gentle eyes. "You'll remember me, and maybe you'll remember what it means to live." His words were simple, but they struck deep. Ilara didn't know what to call the feeling that grew in her chest. This strange warmth, this ache, this joy and fear all at once. Perhaps it was love. Perhaps it was the beginning of something greater than both their worlds. As the sun set behind the palace towers, she looked at him and whispered, "Then I will live every moment I can." "With you," Aaron said nothing. But his hand found hers, and for the first time, the immortal princess and the mortal soldier stood together, not as ruler and prisoner, but as two souls from different worlds learning what it meant to feel alive. Peace never lasts forever. For many years, the Illyrian Empire had ruled the stars without challenge. But now the dark ships of the Dravic swarm filled the sky like a storm. They came without warning, vast, endless, merciless. The Dravic were ancient enemies, creatures of claws and iron, feeding on worlds and leaving nothing but ash. The Queen's calm empire trembled for the first time in centuries. When the first attack struck the outer colonies, the Illyrian fleet fell into chaos. Their soldiers were powerful but untested, their weapons strong but slow. They had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. In the royal palace, the Queen held council. Her generals argued, voices sharp and afraid. And standing quietly at the back of the hall was Captain Aaron Blake, the human who had once been a prisoner. He listened for a while, then finally spoke. You're spreading your forces too thin, he said firmly. The Dravik don't fight with honor, they fight to overwhelm. You need to pull back and defend the heart first. The generals turned toward him, insulted. You dare speak strategy before the queen? One shouted, but the queen raised her hand. Let him speak. Aaron's tone stayed calm. You think strength is about power. It's not. It's about will. You can't defend every border. You must hold what matters most and fight together, not apart. The queen studied him. He spoke not as a servant, but as a leader, a man who had seen war up close and paid its price. Her pride resisted his words, but her instinct told her he was right. That night, the first Dravik ships broke through the capital's defenses. Fire rained from the sky. The palace shook. The city's towers, once shining with light, burned in red and black. Alara ran through the corridors, helping the wounded. The air was filled with screams, smoke, and the scent of fear. The Alyran soldiers, once proud and flawless, now panicked like children. And through the chaos, one voice cut through the fear. Hold the line. Don't give them an inch. It was Aaron. He had taken up arms again, wearing a borrowed Alyran chest plate that didn't quite fit, a plasma rifle in his hands. His commands were sharp, his courage like fire. He rallied the guards, the workers, anyone who could fight. When the queen saw him leading her soldiers, this mortal, bleeding and shouting orders, her heart twisted with something she could not name. From the upper tower, she watched as he ran through the battlefield beside Alara, covering her every move, shielding her when explosions tore through the air. At one point, a Dravik soldier lunged at Alara from behind. Aaron turned just in time, pulling her out of the way, taking the hit across his shoulder instead. He gritted his teeth, shoved the creature back, and fired until it fell. Alara's hand shook as she tried to stop his bleeding. You're hurt! Aaron only smiled, his breath heavy. I've been worse. Tears filled her eyes, but there was no time for more words. The war raged on. Hours later, when dawn finally broke, the capital still stood, but barely. Smoke rose from the ruins. Thousands were gone. Yet the Dravik fleet had been pushed back for now. The queen walked through the wreckage, her silver gown stained with ash. Her people bowed to her, but their eyes were on someone else, the human who had fought beside them. Aaron stood among the soldiers, face scarred, armor broken, but his spirit unshaken. The queen approached him slowly. You saved my daughter, she said quietly. Aaron wiped the dust from his face. I didn't do it for a crown, Your Majesty. I did it because she matters. Because people matter. The queen looked at him for a long time, her heart heavy. In that moment, she saw what her people had lost. The courage to care beyond perfection. The will to fight not for glory, but for love and life. As the sun rose over the battered city, the queen whispered almost to herself, perhaps the strongest hearts are the mortal ones. And from afar, Princess Alara stood watching him, her heart full of pride and fear, knowing that the man she loved was the one keeping her world from falling apart. The war ended after 3 endless days of blood and fire. The Alyran Empire, once so proud and untouchable, stood wounded and shaken. The city that once glowed with silver light was now covered in smoke and scars. Towers had fallen, lives had been lost, and even the queen, immortal and strong, felt the weight of grief she had not known for centuries. But among the ruins stood Captain Aaron Blake. He was alive, though barely. His right arm was cut, his shoulder burned, and his armor torn. Yet even as the medics tried to tend to him, he was helping others, lifting stones, pulling survivors from the rubble, comforting soldiers who had lost everything. Princess Alara found him near the palace gates, surrounded by wounded Alyran soldiers. He was giving orders, his voice calm but tired. You need rest, she whispered as she reached him. Aaron smiled faintly. Rest can wait. People need help. Her eyes filled with tears. Even broken, even bleeding, he still thought of others first. She took his hand gently. You've already done more than anyone here. He looked at her then, truly looked, and said softly, So have you. That moment, under the gray sky, the princess felt her heart tremble. She had seen courage before, but never love so pure, so selfless. In the royal chambers, Queen Seraphine stood by the window, staring at the horizon where the last fires still burned. The weight of command pressed on her shoulders. For ages, the Illyrian had seen themselves as perfect, untouchable, eternal. But all it took was one war, one enemy, and one human to remind her how fragile power could be. When Aaron entered the hall, limping slightly, the guards moved to stop him, but the queen raised her hand. "Let him through." He bowed slightly, though he looked exhausted. "Your Majesty," she studied him in silence. His face was rough, marked by pain and dirt, yet there was a quiet strength in his eyes. "You risked your life for my people," she said. "For a world that is not your own. Why?" Aaron hesitated, then said quietly, "Because when I see people suffering, I can't stand still. It doesn't matter what world they're from. I fought because it was the right thing to do." The queen walked closer, her long gown whispering against the broken floor. "And if you had died?" He smiled tiredly. "Then I would have died doing something that mattered." The queen felt something stir in her heart, something she had not felt in centuries. Respect, admiration, and a small, quiet guilt. She had looked down on humanity, believing them weak, but this man had done more for her empire in 3 days than most of her generals in a lifetime. "You have changed my daughter," she said softly. "I can see it in her eyes." Aaron lowered his head. "She changed me too." The queen turned away, hiding her expression. "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air. Aaron didn't answer right away. He looked down, his jaw tight, then met her eyes with quiet honesty. "Yes, more than I thought I could." For a moment the queen said nothing. The hall was silent except for the sound of distant wind. Finally she sighed. "You are immortal, Aaron Blake. You will wither and fade while she remains. Do you understand the pain you are choosing for her?" He nodded slowly. "I do. But she deserves someone who will love her completely, even if it's only for a short while." The queen turned back toward the window. The first rays of sunlight broke through the smoke, painting the ruins in gold. She had lived 1,000 years, but never had she seen something so human, so pure, so powerful. Perhaps, she thought, this is what immortality was meant for. Not endless life, but endless love. She looked at him one last time. "You have my respect, Captain, and my warning. If you break her heart, even death will not hide you." Aaron smiled softly. "Fair enough, Your Majesty." When he left the chamber, Alara was waiting outside. She looked at him with eyes full of relief and hope. Without words, she took his hand, and for the first time since the war began, the palace felt alive again. The queen watched them from afar, her heart heavy yet warm. She finally understood something the Illyrian had forgotten for ages, that the greatest strength is not in power or perfection, but in the fragile, beautiful hearts that dare to love despite the end. Weeks passed after the war, and slowly the Illyrian Empire began to heal. The broken towers were rebuilt, the wounded were cared for, and the sound of laughter slowly returned to the streets. But inside the palace, something new was blooming, something brighter than any victory. Princess Alara and Captain Aaron Blake were seen together often. They walked through the gardens at dawn, spoke quietly in the halls, and sometimes shared soft laughter that echoed down the marble corridors. What began as curiosity had grown into something deeper, an unspoken bond between two souls who had faced death together and survived. At first, the queen watched silently. She said nothing, though she could see how her daughter's eyes followed the human wherever he went. She saw the way Aaron would stop and bow slightly whenever he passed the princess, even when his wound still ached. And she saw love, the kind that no rule, no distance, no time could destroy. One morning, Ilara came to her mother's chamber. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. "Mother," she said, "I have made my choice." The queen turned slowly, Though she already knew what her daughter would say, Alara took a deep breath. I love him, and I wish to marry him. The queen stood silent for a long time. The air between them felt heavy. Finally she said quietly, You are the heir to an empire, Alara. You cannot bind your life to a mortal who will age and die while you remain unchanged. Alara's voice broke softly, but she did not look away. Then I will love him while he lives. That is enough for me. The queen's eyes softened. For centuries she had believed that immortality was a gift, but now she saw that it was also a chain. Her daughter was choosing love over eternity, and somehow that felt more powerful than all her wisdom and age. After a long silence, the queen finally said, If this is your heart's will, then so be it. Alara's eyes filled with tears of relief. She bowed deeply, whispering, Thank you, Mother. The wedding took place beneath the crystal dome of Illyria, where starlight shone through the glass like rivers of light. The Illyrian gathered from across the empire, curious and silent. 1,000 immortal eyes watched as the mortal and the princess stood side by side. Aaron wore simple armor polished to silver shine. His scars were still visible, but his heart was calm. Illyria stood in a gown of soft blue silk that shimmered like the night sky. Her golden eyes glowed as she looked at him, eyes full of pride, love, and a hint of sorrow for the years she knew she would outlive. The queen herself presided over the ceremony. Her voice echoed through the hall as she spoke. May the stars bear witness to this union, of two hearts from different worlds, bound not by time but by choice. When Aaron looked into Alara's eyes, the entire world seemed to fade. He said softly, I don't promise forever, Alara. Only every heartbeat I have, and she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. Then I will cherish every heartbeat. They kissed as the hall fell silent. And even the immortal Illyrian felt something stir within them, something they had forgotten long ago. The sound of applause rose, soft at first, then strong. The queen looked upon them, her eyes glistening. She had lived for centuries, but this moment, this fragile, human, beautiful moment, felt like the most precious of all. That night, the palace shone brighter than it ever had before. Music filled the air, and laughter returned to the empire that had once been too proud to feel. Aaron and Alara danced under the stars, their hands entwined, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm. Later, when the guests were gone, Alara rested her head on Aaron's shoulder. Do you ever wish you were like us? She asked softly. Aaron smiled. No. I think being human makes moments like this matter more. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from sadness but from gratitude. She had found love that was not eternal, yet somehow it felt endless. And as the queen watched them from her balcony, she whispered to herself, They have given meaning to forever. Years passed like the soft turning of pages in an old, beautiful book. The Illyrian Empire had changed. The humans in Illyrian no longer feared one another. They traded, shared stories, and even celebrated together. What once began as tension had turned into a bond that stretched across worlds. And at the heart of it all were two souls, Princess Alara and Captain Aaron Blake. Aaron aged as all humans do. His hair turned from dark brown to silver, and lines began to mark his face. But his eyes, those brave, kind eyes, never lost their light. Alara never left his side. Though time did not touch her, she stayed by him through every storm, every quiet morning, and every long night. The queen watched them often from her throne or balcony. There was something beautiful and painful in seeing her daughter laugh beside a man who walked closer each day to the end of his mortal life. Yet there was no regret in Alara's smile, only peace. One evening years later, Aaron sat in the royal garden with a blanket around his shoulders. The stars above seemed closer that night, as if they too had come to listen. Alara sat beside him, her hand resting over his. The air was cool and the soft scent of moonflowers drifted around them. He looked at her with tired eyes, whispering, You haven't changed at all. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering. You have, she said softly, brushing her fingers along the silver in his hair. And every change tells the story of your courage. He laughed weakly. I guess that means my wrinkles are medals then. She laughed through her tears, every one of them. There was silence after that, gentle and full, the kind of silence that holds love too deep for words. Then Aaron said, Promise me something. Anything, she whispered. When I'm gone, don't let them forget that I was here, that a human once loved an Illyrian princess with all his heart. Ilara's throat tightened, but she nodded. They will remember, Aaron. I will make sure they remember. He smiled, closing his eyes. Then I can rest. And beneath the endless sky, Aaron took his final breath in her arms. Ilara held him close, her tears falling silently onto his hand. She felt his warmth fade, yet his presence lingered in every heartbeat of her own. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She only whispered, Sleep well, my love. Days later, the palace stood in solemn stillness. The queen entered her daughter's chamber quietly. Ilara sat by the window, the morning light bathing her in gold, but her face was pale with grief. Aaron's cloak lay folded neatly beside her. The queen hesitated, her heart heavy. She had lived for centuries and seen empires rise and fall, but nothing in her long life had prepared her for this moment. She spoke softly. Ilara. Who was he truly? This human who changed our world? Ilara turned to her, eyes shining through tears, voice trembling but proud. He was no warrior or king, mother. He was simply the man I married. The queen felt her breath catch. Those words carried more power than any title or crown. She knelt beside her daughter, tears filling her immortal eyes. She whispered, Then his name shall live forever among us. From that day, Aaron's name was written into the royal chronicles, not as a soldier, but as the human who taught the immortals to love. His statue stood in the palace garden, his hand outstretched toward the stars, where he once promised forever in every heartbeat. Many years later, when visitors came to the palace, they would sometimes see the queen standing before that statue in silence. When asked who the man was, she would smile softly and say, The man my daughter married. And in those words there was pride, love, and something even deeper. A reminder that even in a world of immortals, it was a mortal heart that had left the most eternal mark. Under the same stars that once watched their wedding, Ilara still sat in the garden some nights, her hand resting on the cool stone of his statue. She would whisper quietly, You kept your promise, my love. Every heartbeat still echoes. And the wind, soft and gentle, seemed to whisper back, Forever, Ilara.